tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So the Buddha gives this clear model for how we live in relationship with others in Digha Nikaya 31, Advice to Sigalika. And the Six Directions model is the most famous part of this discourse, but the whole first part of the discourse contains a lot of other guidelines appropriate to a young man who hasn't, fully grown up. The backstory that the commentaries tell us is that the Buddha knew this kid's parents and who have now passed away. And the Buddha comes across this young man, Sigalika, doing kind of the morning prayers that his father has asked him to do before his father died. Said, do the prayer to the Six Directions. So he's doing what sounds like kind of a classic Hindu style or early Hindu style prayer. He's soaking wet with wet hair. He's offering water in the directions. But the parents were actually devotees of the Buddha, which is why they asked him to, check on their kid. And so the Buddha goes to see the kid, and he's like 20 maybe, late teens. And he says, householder, what are you doing? And Sigalika says, I'm doing the offering that my dad told me to do. And the Buddha says, that's not how you do the Six Directions offering. Let me tell you how to do it. And the kid is respectful. He's like, great, please tell me how to do it. And the Buddha says, first, let me tell you a whole bunch of other things, and gives him a whole list of teachings around things like, not gambling, hanging out with better friends, not staying out late, not like, staying out all night, going to shows and drinking too much and coming home late. And, basically he says, like, shape up your party life and, hang out with better friends. And then he says, okay, now I'll tell you how to do the Six Directions offering. So if you go to the text, you'll see a long list of, the guidelines essentially on how to not be a disorganized young adult. So that's great. If that's helpful advice to you, please take it. But then the Buddha gets into the Six Directions teaching, and he does a thing that he does over and over in his teaching, where he reformulates a practice or an idea or a teaching out of the material and into the either psychological or metaphorical, So in a teaching where he's talking to a farmer, and the farmer says, this is my work. I, till the field and plant the seeds and water them and grow the crop. And the Buddha says, I prepare the ground of the mind with mindfulness, and I plant the seeds of ethical action, and I grow the crop with concentration, and harvest the fruit of insight. So he spins the physical material into the numinous, either psychological or spiritual or both, or ethical very often, and that's what he does here. So instead of the literal directions, pouring water to the east, to the south, to the west, to the north, the Buddha says, here's the Six Directions. And the Six Directions are categories of relationship. So the east is parents, the south is teachers, the west is spouse, the north is friends and colleagues, below is employees or those who are in service in some way to our position in the community, and above is spiritual guides, traditionally ascetics and Brahmins, folks we support with our dana or generosity, and who guide us in subtler or spiritual ways. And the way the Buddha teaches this to this young man, Sigalika, is that each one of these types, kind of cardinal types of relationship that he will enter into as he becomes an adult, carries a set of responsibilities that we would really call a kind of reciprocity or accountability, because, and this is unusual, by the way, for texts of this era, they're much more egalitarian than other social texts of the time, like the laws of Manu, for instance, that shows up very slightly later in Indian history, or some of the other early legal codes that define, the responsibilities of, you know, husbands to wives, etc. Um, in the Buddha's version, there's duties or responsibilities that flow both ways. And so, when I tell you what the ones are for like husband and wife, to our modern ears, it still sounds patriarchal, but compared to most of the other texts, 1,000 years before or after this one, it's actually one of by far the most egalitarian, where there are actually duties that the husband has toward his wife, not just the other way around. The wife isn't just a servant, essentially, um, and child bearer. So so here's the duties in brief, and then we can generalize on them. For the direction of the East, where things originate, mother and father, there's a classic teaching throughout the Dharma that respect and honoring of one's parents is central and important. Of course, for a lot of us, this is not obvious or easy and may entail repair, attachment repair, various kinds of therapeutic intervention and healing to come to a feeling of gratitude, and respect for parents. For those of us for whom there's been harm or trauma in the direction of the parents, this can become a practice of, how do I come toward either forgiveness or the intention to forgive, even like the intention to forgive someday when I'm ready is in the right direction. What we're really going for in all of these is first, any repair needed so that I can hold the relationship in my heart without conflict in myself. It doesn't actually mean, I need to find repair with the external person, like I have to go hunt down, my mother, my father, whoever, and get into a real conversation with them. Maybe you do, maybe you can. That's great if that's needed and possible and healthy. Maybe you don't. Like all loving kindness practice and healing practice in the Dharma, uh, the bulk of it really happens internally, right? It's not so much about what you do with other people who have their own challenges and complications, but really about whether you're suffering. Am I carrying around distress in my own heart? Unresolved anger or fear, or some kind of process that needs resolve in my own heart. So here's the classical duties between parents and children. Children are to respect parents with the feeling of, I will support them who supported me. So this is not so much what little children should feel toward their adult parents, but what grown children should feel toward their adult parents. I will support them who supported me when I was young. I will do my duty to them. I will maintain the family lineage and tradition. I'll be worthy of my inheritance. And I will make donations on behalf of dead ancestors. That's the traditional guidelines that children, grown children, would do to honor their parents, living or dead. And then parents reciprocate, and really throughout your whole life, by restraining you from wrongdoing, guiding you toward good actions, training you in a profession, supporting the choice of a suitable spouse, and in due time handing over the inheritance. All of these can be fraught with complication, as folks who live in arranged marriage cultures know. Um, and you know, uh, and for any of them that seem particularly antique, I would encourage you to translate it into your context, right? In what ways do your parents support you, or should they? That they don't, you know. Um, I just came through a somewhat challenging inheritance process after my father passed away, not through anyone's ill intent, but through the challenges of, layers of wills and trusts and lawyers and, you know, things that people said that weren't written down, and and maintaining, you know, like loving respect toward my deceased father was challenging at moments when we would stare at his documents and be like, dude, what is this? You know? And yeah, but there's, there's the practice, right? It's uh, like all of our practices, these are not guidelines to just simply accomplish and be like, haha, check off. I respected my parents, done. But they are living disciplines to really, breathe and work through. So that we're always working through layers of dukkha, layers of challenge, coming to states of more generosity, more kindness, more patience, more, uh, you know, acceptance of everyone's humanity, all of that. So that's the East. In the South is the direction of the teachers. As I said in the meditation, this is really not so much spiritual teachers, but like teachers of crafts, professions, knowledge. So, your teachers in school, your teachers and in your trade, your teachers at work, mentors, folks like that. And some of these guidelines again are a bit antique, but here you go. Students respect their teachers by rising for them, regularly attending lessons, eagerly desiring to learn, duly serving them, and receiving instruction. You probably do most of those except stand up when your teacher walks into the room, but you could try it out. They'll be like, why are you standing up? Um, and teachers reciprocate by training students in self-discipline, ensuring the teachings are well grasped, instructing them in every branch of knowledge, introducing their friends and colleagues. So your teachers have a responsibility to help you with networking, and providing safeguards in every direction. So this is really coming from a culture where, think about like apprenticeship culture, right? Where the teacher is really setting you up for your life of, what you're doing. Um, and that it's appropriate for them to do so. This is really part of what I like about this direction is it encourages me to think about my teachers not just in a transactional way. It's a very relational way of thinking about teachers. And, I did not do well in school for most of school. And so I had a kind of contentious relationship with teachers. I didn't feel like they were supporting me. I wasn't very respectful to them, so why would they? All of that. And when I read this, it makes me really think toward like, who were the mentors who really guided me, who did actually, you know, bring me further in my profession or really give more in a way that would uplift me, really see me, very, very clearly and offer, strong instruction, clear instruction. So just really, if you have any of those folks, what a gift, but bringing them to mind. And again, a guideline, so many of these guidelines are challenging for my, uh, you know, bitter Gen X heart, but to actually just like quietly, but in a true and sincere way, respect my teachers, um, rather than being like, another brick in the wall about the whole thing. Um, teachers leave our kids alone. I was like, no, teachers don't leave the kids alone. Like, but be better teachers, and students be better students, you know. So that's the South, teachers. West is spouse and family. So, you know, of course, it's set in a heteronormative frame, so husband and wife, but please, just make that spouse and partner because we have mixed up all those roles. Um, this one is challenging because many of us have relationship ideals now that, where like there's not even the amount of hierarchy that these duties suggest, much more egalitarian. So, reframe or discard these as you like in our very postmodern relationship culture. But here's the traditional guidelines. Husbands should respect their wives by honoring them, not disrespecting them, being faithful, sharing authority, and giving them gifts. So again, that is a far more egalitarian and, you know, uh, like husbands' responsibilities toward their wives than you see in a lot of ancient texts. So I want to honor it for that. Um, and wives reciprocate by being well organized, being kindly disposed to the in-laws and household workers, being faithful, looking after the household goods, and being skillful and diligent in all duties. So this does frame, wives as a kind of glorified worker in many ways. Um, uh, so, that's less how most of us want our partnerships to be like nowadays. Um, I mean, you could just flip them and be like, yeah, husbands should, be well organized, kindly disposed, faithful, look after the household goods, and be skillful and diligent. Like, please genderqueer this in any way you like. But the thing I like about it in a certain way is that even though it does have the sense that like one of the partners is doing a lot of household work and the other one is doing a lot of, kind of providing, there's a sense that there's a flow back and forth, and and there are reciprocal obligations. So that's husband and wife in the direction of the West. The direction of the North is friends and colleagues. Um, Traditionally, it's the North because the North is the path toward the beyond, and that's your friends and colleagues. Your kalyanamitta, your spiritual friends, are what lead you toward goodness if they are the appropriate sort of friends, the friends that Sigalika should hang out with, right? If he renounces his party lifestyle and starts to, come to the temple more, get better friends. So traditionally, friends and colleagues are respected by generosity, kind words, acting for their welfare, impartiality. See if you can pull that off in your friend group. Impartiality and honesty. Friends and colleagues reciprocate by protecting you when you're vulnerable, also protecting your wealth, being a refuge when you're afraid, not abandoning you in misfortune, and honoring all your descendants. So, um, your friends are still your friends when you're down and out. And part of what's interesting to me about the friends and colleagues directions here is that the responsibilities friends have toward you, or that we have toward our friends, is in this telling, and this says something about the culture, I think, of the time. In a certain way, it's very material and almost like, protect you when you're vulnerable, also protect your wealth, and be a refuge when you're afraid, and not abandon you in misfortune. Like, and honoring your descendants. Like, there's a lot of being cared for here by your friends, including like, economically, right? And how do your friends protect your wealth? Again, remember he's talking to a party kid. So, he's a little bit like, get good friends and they'll help you stop gambling and, frittering away your money on, you know, dancing shows and whatever you're going to. But but I really like this partly because for me, it paints a picture of friendship, of peer friendship, that's more intimate, actually, more interwoven than a lot of the ways I see peer friendships happening, where the main thing we do is we kind of check in emotionally, about like what's going on in our lives. But it would be kind of an extreme thing for my friend, for a friend to be like, you know, things have gone really badly. I need some money, you know. And like certainly there's lots of time, like of course that happens in different communities in different ways where communities support each other. Actually, this happens a lot, depending on your class background, your social background, this could be very normal. But for but the Buddha's talking to Sigalika, as a middle class, um, probably a little bit wealthy kid. Um, and at least in middle class and wealthy families um, that I know right now, that kind of material interweaving with friends is not actually as common. I think it's more common, in more working class communities. Um, so really feeling how in this web of actually quite, highly ordered relationships, friends and colleagues actually have quite an important role here. That maybe as, in our somewhat different circumstances, we might just lean into the inquiry of like, how could my relationships with my friends and colleagues be different? How could they be deeper? You know, how could they hold more aspects of my life? How could I feel more protected by them? You know, uh, this is And you could expand this into a kind of, mutual aid sort of model for how we really care for each other in challenging times, not abandoning each other in misfortune. Um, so then we get to the difficult, for our very egalitarian sensibilities, direction of the below, which is workers and servants traditionally. Here's the traditional guidelines, and then we can deconstruct them. But employers respect employees by, and if you specifically think about employers and employees, and again, that's my modern retranslation, because I'm not going to use like master servant sort of language, mostly because nobody I know has direct servants, although lots of us have, like we talked about, folks who are in service roles to us, um, in various ways, regardless of our class, positionality. We go to the store and someone is at the checkout counter, and folks are taking care of all sorts of things, picking up the trash and caring for us when we go to the hospital and all these things. So employers respect employees by allocating work according to aptitude, providing wages and food, looking after the sick, sharing special treats, and giving reasonable time off work. So not bad, right? Not all employers here do that very well. So, um, look after the sick, provide wages and food, share special treats, right? I don't know the last time. My employer shares special treats when I go in for, like, staff celebration day. There's cookies. Like, I'll take it. That's cool. Um, Employees reciprocate by being willing to start early and finish late when necessary, taking only what is given, doing their work well, and promoting a good reputation for the organization. So, uh, mutual respect among employers and employees, and non-abusive working conditions, basically. Lastly, the above direction spiritual guides, traditionally called ascetics and Brahmins. So the devotee respects their spiritual guides, but through kindly actions, speech, and thoughts, having an open door, and providing material needs. Having an open door is like, when like the monastics come begging to your house, or, you invite them in, you take care of them, that kind of thing. And of course, giving dana, providing their material needs. Spiritual guides reciprocate by restraining you from wrongdoing, guiding you to good actions, thinking compassionately, telling you what you ought to know, clarifying what you already know, and showing you the path to heaven. So, in whatever way I'm accomplishing any of those, I hope so, in this particular role, this moment as a spiritual guide of sorts. May we all find the path to heaven. I'm doing the best I can here, and I'm grateful for what comes my way in that role, and it's beautiful to practice this role also, for instance, with the monastics when we go up to Abhayagiri, go up to the monastery, and bring a meal, give dana, and really feel. And if you don't have any monastics near you, or have a relationship with monastics near you, I really encourage finding some, besides this kind of like, lay teacher, who you support and learn from, which is also great, but to really be in contact with a mendicant sangha who lives on dana, is completely immersed in the lifestyle of training others, living, fully by the monastic code, the Vinaya, and to feel what it's like to be in the presence of these folks who depend completely on support, and whose entire existence is oriented around the flow between, you know, uh, their role as monastics and guides and the role of the lay people. And it can just inspire so much devotion, really, to be around these folks, and um, to feel this thing that I think is actually quite difficult to teach Westerners to feel, which is that giving dana is so joyful. That, like, supporting these folks, the sangha, can be so joyful, and just like how wonderful it feels to bring something of value and give it. and for it to be received. And that's just a subtle kind of extraordinary feeling that I think is just unusual in a culture that doesn't do dana with much practice. Uh, so just encouraging that as a way to very literally practice the sixth direction there. So that's the formal six directions model from the Sigalika, Digha 31. And again, as I began with, just reflecting on how in this model, and you can abstract it to include other kinds of relationships, um, you know, the question about like where are siblings in this, just put them in, you know, like I said, I kind of put them in the friends and colleagues direction because the qualities, generosity, kind words, protection, all of those really apply in the sibling direction. You can fit in all the people around you somewhere in this. Part of what I love about this, different from the very impersonal kind of just metta for all beings practice, is that it encourages me to both remember all the people in my web, like to not take anyone for granted, to not take for granted the folks that are in the service roles or members of my family or my work colleagues where like, yeah, I relate to them, I like them, I try to do my work well with them. And, sometimes work is annoying and I want to not think about them and, all that. Um, to hold them with, you know, respect and care and obligation. And how it encourages me to hold everyone in my circle with a certain kind of obligation. You know, obligation might sound pushy or pejorative to you, but with accountability and with reciprocity, right? Maybe it's the most beautiful term right now for this. That we're really in a web together, and that if I go back to the framing story of this kid Sigalika, his parents have passed away, he's getting the inheritance. His dad says to the Buddha like, "Hey, go check on my kid, make sure he's not partying too hard." And the Buddha gives this teaching that in a way amounts to like, don't lose your place in the web of relations. Don't think that you're out there on your own and that what you do doesn't matter. And um, you know, um, there's uh, there's a beautiful teaching right now in the parenting world. Um, uh, there's a beautiful book by Gabor Mate called something like like Hold On to Your Kids, and it's about not succumbing to the tendency of kids to entirely turn toward peer relationships and turn away from familial relationships for support in the teenage years, and to really stay close in a way as best you can as kids grow. And so I appreciate that, as I have a 9-year-old. And I appreciate how the Six Directions practice fills out my sense of relatedness, because it includes all these people that I might not think of as my real connections. I am of a generation and perhaps gender and perhaps, social psychology coming in the, somewhere in late individualistic neoliberal capitalism, where I can easily feel alone and isolated and not connected to a web of people. You know, um, the book Bowling Alone from a couple of decades ago, really an analysis of the crumbling of community in American life. And of course, this touches into the deepening isolation, particularly in young people who've grown up immersed in internet culture, who are, having less stable friendships, less intimate relationships, less sex, certainly less church going, less group forming, less connectedness in community than almost any generation before. And this is a warning about the dangers in feeling disconnected, in really losing connection with, you know, the sense of being at the center of a web of connections, that everywhere you turn, there's people, you know. There's there's the workers, and there's the teachers, and there's your friends, and there's your family, and there's your partner, and there's, you know, and there's spiritual folks, whether you relate directly with them or not, you know. Somewhere out there is the Dalai Lama being the Dalai Lama, you know. Somewhere out there is, you know, these extraordinary people being extraordinary people, you know, um, guiding us in so many ways. And to just remember that we are connected to them, and that we're connected to them with responsibilities, with duties, right? That we're not just connected in a kind of like, I follow them on Instagram and I like their advice, you know, um, but there's nothing two-way about it. But it's more like, I started following them on Instagram and I really liked what they were doing. So I looked them up. I sent them some money, like I materially supported them. And then I got into their small group and I met people and I relate with those people and we do things together and, you know, and. Um, However we find webs of connection nowadays, you know, a lot of my peers in the Dharma world, you know, when they started teaching, started primarily offering like, you know, workshops and classes and retreats, which is great, good, all good stuff. My first impulse was to start a weekly group, which is, you know, here we are a decade later. And the thing that is the most satisfying to me in having done this group for so long is, you know, when like, you know, uh, the gang at, you know, a Sangha member's house suddenly, you know, turns on their video and there's four of them who've gathered in one living room to join up. Or someone says, "Oh yeah, I was visiting from, you know, I was visiting from Portland and I'm staying at, you know, such and such's house in Berkeley, who I met here." And that we've created something where people are, you know, not just tuning in to hear the teacher talk, you know, once a week or whenever, or watching the videos on YouTube. Blessings to y'all watching this on YouTube, but come, like, come hang out. um, that people are actually like making real friendships and staying connected over time. And, you know, I'm available to officiate weddings. Like, I've done it. You know, it's wild. It's totally wild. It does happen. Um, but the reminder just that we are that we're never isolated, even in moments in our life where we feel isolated, where, you know, you might be like, I'm estranged from my parents. I didn't have a good experience. I'm going to go around all the directions. I'm estranged from my parents. I didn't have a good experience in school. I'm not married. I don't have a partner or a person friend or whatever you want. My friends are, you know, not entirely wholesome, or there's not enough of them, or they're not entirely supportive of me. You know, I feel weird about workers, you know, like I'm not connected to the web of economics that I'm in. And it's really hard to find ethical spiritual teachers who aren't going to abuse me. So I feel super isolated in the world. Like, this is not really an exaggeration for a lot of people out there, right? Where all of the directions have been broken in some way or wounded in some way through the depredations of, you know, the hyper individualistic, separated, disconnected culture that we've developed. And so the encouragement here, you know, even in baby steps, is to rebuild, you know, you don't have to become like a community organizer in your town, but yes, please do that. But like, to rebuild the web of community around you, even individually, you know, and just start with the easiest direction. Pick whatever's easiest. Be like, I'm going to call my friends more often. You know, I'm not just going to text them emojis. I'm going to call them up and be like, yo, I miss you. Let's go to the park and, like, you know, whatever you do, I don't know, kick a hacky sack around, like drink some, you know, nice, stimulating beverage in a cafe with other human beings, not on screens, I don't know, whatever you do. Um, uh, or take a relationship that is happening, like if you have a partner or a spouse or a sweetheart, um, lean into your reciprocal obligations to them, buy them a gift, buy them some gifts, it never hurts, really. So there's just an encouragement to lean into the web of relationships to brighten the very real, human relationships around us, not in the abstract, but in the direct, you know, messy, repair needed, um, generosity and gratitude, uh, welcomed human dimension. So, letting it rest there. I'm so glad that we are friends and peers and students and teachers and colleagues and all the things that we are to each other. It's just such a pleasure. So, hi. Thanks for joining us for this talk and practice. If these recordings are helpful for you, please consider supporting the Sangha with a donation of any amount. You can find links to our website and the donation page below in the description. Liking and subscribing helps the channel, and I'm grateful for your presence, your practice, and anything you can give to support our little community. Thank you so much. Take care.